Welcome to the ABA Speech Podcast. This is our first episode with the name change. We've changed the name of the podcast from Autism Outreach to the ABA Speech Podcast. Are we going to stop talking about supporting autistic learners? No, never. But we are going to broaden our scope just a bit. So I think this is a great episode to do that with. I had an amazing conversation with Dr. Matthew Brodhead. If you've ever taken a course in our membership, the ABA Speech Connection, or have just taken a course with us and aren't a member yet, join us, please. But I have talked about one of his articles that discusses a framework for how we can collaborate. This is an article that was written 9 years ago, but I told Matt that this is still a very important article for me and for all of the ethics trainings that I do. So we get into that. We talk about collaboration a little bit, and we also talk about a sabbatical that he took where he was researching and doing some digging into the state of restraint and seclusion in public school settings. We talk about that. I am a part-time school-based SLP and have been for most of my career. So I am always thinking about how can I support all professionals, but how can I really support public school employees? So we're going to get into that. And he has some really great ideas about, trust your gut. There's a lot of misapplication out there. And sometimes people are normalizing how we're physically managing people, which is not great. And he talks all about that. If you don't know Dr. Matthew Brodhead, he is a wealth of information and he is just kind and nice and easy to talk to. So I know you're going to love this. He is an associate professor at Michigan State University. He's recognized within the academic community as a leader in the area of behavioral treatments for autism and one of the foremost experts in the areas of ethics and professionalism in the practice of applied behavior analysis, which I've taught an ethics class here at Kent State. Ooh, I actually have my Kent State mug today. And ethics is just very important to me. Dr. Brodhead currently serves as an associate editor for the Journal of Behavioral Education, Behavior Analysis and Practice. I love that publication, and the Journal of Developmental and Physical Disabilities. In 2024, Dr. Brodhead received the Outstanding Mentor Award from the Association for Behavior Analysis International and recognition of his excellence in advising the next generation of behavior analysts. So whether you are a speech language pathologist, a BCBA, a parent, this is a wonderful conversation today about such an important and timely topic. I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Matthew Brodhead. I'm Rose Griffin, a speech therapist, board-certified behavior analyst, and founder of ABA Speech. It wasn't all that long ago that I felt overwhelmed by providing therapy for my autistic students and any students who were not yet speaking. Fast forward through many doubts, tears, research, and courses, and you will see the framework that I use today and share with over 60,000 readers weekly. One that will help you support your students and feel more confident in the process. I created the ABA Speech Podcast to give you simple, step-by-step strategies to help you reach all of your students wherever they are on their communication journeys. If you're a speech therapist, BCBA, RBT student, or parent who's looking to help all students develop a way to communicate with the world, you are in the right place, friend. Let's get started. Welcome to the show. We have a wonderful guest that I've been talking about probably for the last 7 years. You wrote this article that we're going to get into. You don't know me, but we actually did exchange emails a while ago. I was like, can I include this graphic? And you're like, sure. Welcome to the show, Dr. Matthew Brodhead. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, Rose. It's great to put a face to the name and be able to talk with you and your listeners.
I'm excited to get into just kind of your background. I obviously know who you are because you wrote this, you write a lot of great articles and you've done so much in the field. But you have written this article that is kind of flows nicely with all the talking and training I do in my membership, the ABA Speech Connection for speech therapists and BCBA. It's about, collaboration and how to kind of get along better and clinically analyze things, which is really important. But when I was researching just you on ResearchGate and kind of your background, I was like, Oh my gosh, I think you've presented at every single ABA conference that exists. I did 11 last year. Oh, I have one more, Seattle, in a couple weeks. And I don't know, with three kids, I'm just like, I'm fatigued. I'm like, next year, new plan. I'm going to two. But I'm excited to hear about that too, because you really have done so many different conferences, and that just takes a certain level of energy, just the traveling and the speaking and the schmoozing. But for those of us that are not as familiar with your work, can you just tell us a little bit about kind of your journey into the field, why you got into this, and you seem you're super passionate about research and presenting dissemination, and just kind of share with us about that.
Yeah, sure. Just to point out on the travel, like it is tiring with kids, and I make this promise every year, like I'm going to do less, and then somehow it doesn't end up that way.
Yeah.
Like I ended up getting like platinum status like in February
Wow.
with Delta. And I was like, how did this happen so soon? And that's indicative of a larger a larger problem
Yeah.
of my ability to say no.
Yeah.
But to get to the question about how I got started, I was, undergraduate at Western Michigan University, and I sort of like cycled through a few different majors. I was doing writing, and then I was doing music for a while. I played percussion and jazz drums, and then I got into psychology, and it just happened to be that Western had this world-renowned behavior analysis program, and it was one of those things where everything came together at the right time, because the same time I took my Psych 360 class, which was the concepts and principles or equivalent class, was when I was doing my practicum at Croydon Avenue School, and that was the discrete trial practicum, where we were applying those principles that we were learning in class. And so everything, just like my whole worldview, came together and put me on a course of just, or a direction of just so much excitement and passion for not only learning about human behavior, but sharing the knowledge that I learn, and getting excited about it with other people. And so I haven't looked back since. And along the way too, met a lot of really great people from other disciplines who have helped to shape, the way that I think. And so
Mhm.
that's all. That's the short form version. I have a longer elevator speech, but it'd have to be a really tall building.
It's amazing. No, I mean, all the research you've done and you've done so much in the field. It's just amazing. If you haven't read an article, you've probably read one of your articles or something you've reviewed or something. Okay, fascinating. I love it. Interesting that you have a background in music. I actually am a harpist. I mean, I only play around Christmas time now, but today, as we're taping this, is my middle daughter's first harp lesson. So hopefully my oldest took it for 3 years, and she chose soccer, travel soccer. But I'm just hoping with this beautiful harp that we have one that loves it. Okay, interesting that and the writing too. That's actually something I'm trying to get a lot better at. I think I'm going to take a course. Writing was never like my jam, but with all the research and, writing that you've done, I'm better at like short form video. I have a pretty decent Instagram following, so I do a lot of that. But I'm like,
Right.
I need to write, because in my LinkedIn analytics, where I connect with a lot of BCBAs, I always share that. When I'm writing and kind of these like longer form, like just posts, that is what really resonates with people. You get a lot of engagement. I feel like when you're writing and people take time to like read that, they feel like seen, or it really relates to their life. So I'm sure you can, you've probably had parts of your life where you're like, oh yeah, this really resonated with somebody. Obviously, this article I'm going to talk about is almost 10 years old, but it's something that this is how you came on my radar. And obviously, behavioral observations. I'm friends with Matt Sikoria too. So there's this article. It's called Maintaining Professional Relationships in an Interdisciplinary Setting, Strategies for Navigating Non-Behavioral Treatment Recommendations for Individuals with Autism. So being duly certified, I do a lot of talks about collaboration, the ethics of collaboration, as BCBAs. Is it 4 CEUs we need? It's a lot of CEUs we need in ethics. So, and I teach the ethics class here at Kent State. But one of the things you say in the article is that and I always put this quote just like on one slide and let the audience read it. That's supposed to be more like poignant. I took a whole speech class once on Mastermind on how to be better at public speaking. So it says excessive questioning or critiques of non-behavioral treatments by the BCBA may unintentionally erode professional relationships. And I usually say that twice, erode professional relationships, because I've lived this between BCBAs and non-behavioral colleagues. So I guess I'm wondering, like, you probably have seen this happening in real life. And do you think that in the field we've gotten better at that, or it's still kind of the same? It's something we're working on. I feel like BCBAs are known for being really, I guess, overly confident, kind of tunnel vision on ABA. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so when I wrote this article, it was in a lot of ways, and this, if we were on the longer elevator, this would have been part of that speech, is that it's partly autobiographical, because when I came
Right.
to that psychology program into a special ed program for my PhD, I was with a lot of, speech language pathologists, school psych people, and I learned a lot of these lessons the hard way. And I saw a lot of it happening to other people. And
Hmm.
as I came to my senses, I thought that, maybe other people could learn this lesson.
Uh-huh.
And so I do think, I mean, I don't have any data that to suggest, other than just like my observations, that things are getting
Hmm.
better, but it seems that the tension that we might have with other fields might be better. In terms of like getting along with ourselves, I don't know if that's gotten any better. That's a whole
My
other
gosh,
podcast episode.
self imploding. I know I was down at
Right.
FABA and there were some tense situations. I'm like, this person's by this person, by this person. I'm like, oh dear. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
whole
So
thing.
so so I think though that it's I think in a lot of ways it has gotten a lot better, and which is great to see and learn about and hear, because there's no reason why we can't all work together. And um I'm also like, it was one of the few, at that time, it's strange to think about. You look back, there wasn't a whole lot of literature in ethics
Hmm.
back then. It was just like a few like scattered articles, and
Hmm.
it's nice to have seen now so many other like papers on the topic, and then sort of adjacent to this idea about how we interact or engage, because we could have the best technical knowledge, but if we can't communicate that and work with other people, like that technical knowledge is going to be useless. So
Create Harmony is a podcast about setting an intentional rhythm and savoring God's blessings. In this place, we'll take a few minutes to celebrate everyday joys and remind ourselves how to notice goodness that is all around us. During the winter at Create Harmony, we shift our focus to all things cozy and snuggly. And while our days are shorter and darker, we stay attuned to the things that help us reset and restore. At the start of this new year, our podcast is filled with winter self-care, as well as ways to declutter and clear your mind. Check it out.
Yes, it's all about that. So in my ethics class, we use the Bailey and Birch, most updated texts, but we also use the 25 strategies that are more about, and we're going to tape a podcast. Today's my podcast day, guys, taping 5 episodes. But one of the episodes we're going to tape today is about soft skills. And I know that some people are like, oh, I'm not going to read this book, or I'm just going to, with networking and consulting. And I'm like, no, this is the important stuff. Like, if you can't build those relationships, life is all about relationship building. And if you have a hard time with that and you don't convey things in a nice, natural way, I mean, yeah, it
yeah.
gets rough. Did you do your PhD in Utah? Did I see that? I was looking up we just took my family vacation. We went to, I know where you went to school is not by here, but St. George, in Zion Park. I didn't know if you
Yeah,
ever had time to visit there.
I went to Utah State, which is in Logan, Utah, which
Yeah.
is about 20 minutes south of the Idaho border. But
Okay.
we did spend a lot of time in southern Utah. My wife and I actually got engaged on like a 4-night backpacking trip in Canyonlands.
Oh, it's so pretty. I'm just
Yeah,
like, I need to. We were like thinking about snowboarding someday, but we were thinking about St. George. And so we went to visit. We brought our kids. We have 3 kids. And I was just like, I can't believe the world looks like this here. Like I need to be here all the time immediately.
right.
Isn't it breathtaking? Like if you've
It's
never
like
been to Utah, it's like, yeah, I can't believe people live there and get to see that every day. I was just so at peace. You know what I mean?
it's like you're on another planet.
Yes.
The desert's really, I mean, southern Utah is really special, and it's it's very vast, and culturally it's very interesting too. It's like this
Right.
uh it's sort of this conservative
Right.
libertarianism that's sort of like rampant out there too. Like so it's I don't know, like it was just a really just sort of like interesting 4 years that we lived out there.
Yeah.
And
That's
uh
neat.
yeah, I it's beautiful and worth visiting. I think it
It
gets a bad
is.
rap. People either go they ski in Colorado, or they go out
Right.
Nevada. And as much as I love skiing and love the hills to myself, Utah's got the best snow also.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so cool. I know you're outdoorsy. I was like, I got to ask him about Zion.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I really love that article. We've been talking about that a lot. I think that article is so relevant because you have this kind of flow chart in there. And we just did a course that was really popular. I've done it a couple months in a row and have done like Facebook ads to get more people. We have thousands of people that are registering. And I talk about kind of the beginning of that flow chart and talking about kind of these hot button topics between SLPs and BCBAs, like verbal imitation or echoics and Gestalt language processing, which is like this whole other area that there's not a ton of robust research on, and AAC. And so, like, I use the top of the chart. It's just like, or can familiarize yourself with the treatment. You know what I mean? Because that's like point one, right? When people will send me like a DM or a private message on Instagram and be like, yeah, we like, exchanged research. I'm like, wow, that's the gold standard of collaboration, but it is happening. So I just wanted to let you know an
Yay.
article you wrote 9 years ago really is instrumental to my followers and all the
Appreciate
trainings I've
that.
been doing. So thanks. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I learned this about on your behavioral observations. We have a lot more speech language pathologists that listen to my podcast. So they probably haven't listened to that one. But I know you took a sabbatical. We talked about it a little bit to understand restraint and seclusion in public school settings. So as a public school speech language pathologist, like I've worked in the public school for most of my career on some level, but I also have spent a lot of time, most of my career until I started my business in non-public programs. So with kids who are engaging in very severe problem behavior. We actually just had Dr. Dan Mateer from currently from Rutgers on to talk about severe behavior because I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's something that for me, kind of in my lived experience, I've experienced. So can you define kind of what seclusion and restraint is for people that might be listening? Because I know there's speech therapists who probably feel unsafe at work or don't have a BCBA that's coming in to do a behavior plan or they're not trained appropriately. I get a lot of people wanting me to do trainings, on behavior and challenging behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, before I talk about it, an important disclaimer is that the definitions of restraint and seclusion are going to vary from state to state. And
Mm,
so it's real important that listeners familiarize themselves with the specific definitions, and when they could be applied
yeah.
um, in the jurisdictions in which they work and practice. But generally we think about restraint as purposeful physical restriction of a student's freedom of movement. So I guess that would be physical restraint. Unless we're using some sort of mechanical, like strapping somebody down. Hopefully we're not
Yeah.
doing that, or chemical use of drugs. Whereas when we think about seclusion is confining someone in a room or other space from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. And so, notice there it doesn't say anything about, doesn't have a window or there could be a
Right.
door, right? Sometimes people are like, it's not seclusion because there's a window in the room. And my response, a jail cell also often has a window.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Right.
so yeah, those are sort of like, it's about being prevented from leaving in space. That is key to that. So
Yeah, and I think what's hard for people. I remember I was doing so I lived in Austin, Texas when I was doing my hours for my supervision. I had this really neat job in Leander ISD. It's like now a 35 school district. So it was cool. There were three of us. We were autism facilitators and we did all this training and acted as consultants, in the district. I loved it. I was like, speaking to the speech therapist, going out on the campus. And then my BCBA supervisor, I don't know if you know her name's Kelly Rich. She owns Central Texas Autism Center and she started the Verbal Behavior Conference, cool little conference down in
Yeah.
Austin. But we would do our supervision with BCBA trainees or whatever we were called in the day, with people from other parts of Texas. And there was a guy who drove in like 3 hours one way. Okay. And if you've been to Texas, it's rural, just like Ohio, where I live in Ohio, there, a lot of the part of the state is extremely rural. So he drove in 3 hours one way. And he was just telling us about, and he worked for an educational service center. I think that's what they call them down there. I mean, that's what we call them up here in Ohio. So he was like servicing many smaller districts, right? And he was just talking about some of the stuff that he would see on some of his school visits and not like restraint, but it was more like seclusion. And he was like telling the team like, I'm pretty sure that's not okay. What you're doing is not okay. And I think sometimes what happens with public school employees is we do what, and then this is any environment. You get into an environment and you're like, well, this is what we do with student A and this is what happens with student B. And maybe you don't question those things. I mean, I'm a SLP and BCBA, so I'm extremely type A. I'm sure you're always analyzing things too, Matt. And people just kind of take it for what it's worth. But that's not right, right? There's probably so many things going on that people maybe don't even realize are not ethical or not against state regulations and things like that. Would you say that's probably true in kind of the year that you spent?
Yeah, I think it's sort of not to keep to the sort of like the topic of Texas for a second, it's kind of like the wild, wild west in
Yeah.
terms of like, what's regulated in education. And as an aside, like I read a lot about Texas and in
Oh,
the work that I did about how it's pretty open down there for what can go. And when I was down at UT Austin in March
yeah.
for a
Yeah.
conference, I was talking with one of the autism advocates there, who spent a lot of time at the state capitol, and they
Uh-huh.
told me that it took them like 10 years just to convince lawmakers to agree that it wasn't okay to put kids in handcuffs. So it's like
Jeez.
it's pretty wild. But
Wow.
I think that there's a lot of drift in terms of
Yeah.
what happens. So something might start with one person who might be like, maybe they are legitimately a threat to themselves or other people at times,
Right.
and they need like a very focused type of support and prevention from hurting themselves or others. And that sort of like creeps into other cases, or there's lapses in terms of fidelity, and then there's turnover, and nobody's really quite sure who
Right.
started this in the first place and how we got here, but we've just sort of normalized how we're
Yeah.
physically managing people. And
Right.
it's one of the things that we're in the process of revamping our undergraduate teacher ed program here, which is, it's a lot of work, but one of the good things about it is we're trying to think about like, okay, what are like these current issues that we want our students to be equipped with when they go out and be teachers, because we want them to be great teachers, but we also want them to, stay in the profession too, because
Right.
people are leaving in mass. And part of it is knowing what's okay and what isn't when it comes to restraint and seclusion. And so they have that information, and so they can at least be in a position to maybe correct some things that they might see when they get out there, versus going
Mhm.
into their student teaching, not having been exposed to any of this stuff and just seeing what is happening, and then just thinking that, oh, this is just the way that it is, and then perpetuating that the misapplication of those strategies or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I like that.
I do think that there's a lot of drift. Unfortunately, the oversight's just really poor in general. And I think that, and this isn't a knock on administrators. I know that they have a lot that's going on, and education is kind of like a political battering ram, regardless of where you're on the spectrum of
Right.
political opinion. But I think that they're just, what special education is or takes, or what, kids with challenging behavior might need are things that are often lost on people in positions
Mm-hmm.
of influence sometimes. And they just think, just keep these kids from not running into the street or having the police called, and would be good, which obviously,
Right.
obviously you don't want those, but you
Right.
also expect more from public
Yeah.
education.
Yeah. It's complicated. And I think, yeah, I remember down in Texas, I worked, and it was a great district, but I remember one of the first campuses I visited, I think a parapro, like a kid maybe did something, and a parapro, like, poured these little beans out. It was making the kid like pick them up and put them into, and I'm like, that's punishment. Like, is there a plan? Is there, like, what are we doing here? Like, and I like that idea of like the misapplication, or that we're normalizing some of these things. And that people, I think when we know better, we do better. And I think some people don't just stop to analyze, like, why are we doing this? Or sometimes as a speech language pathologist, I know, you know, some meetings for kids who have more complex needs with advocates, lawyers. I've worked in really contentious districts for most of my career before I started my business. It was like sometimes a speech language pathologist might not even be able to stay in the meeting to hear the behavior plan because they have to go see other kids because they'll miss their IEP minutes, right? There's no SLP sub. So it gets really, I always tell speech therapists, make sure you have access to the behavior plan. Like put it on a clipboard and that you understand it, because that's like half the battle, knowing what to do. And with me working in a non-public program, I'm used to seeing very severe problem behavior that is very unsafe for the student, for staff, with safety rooms and like all of that. But it really kind of dawned on me. One of my coworkers has always worked in a public school with kids who really don't have severe challenging behavior, but she had somebody who I think hit her arm or like was verbally aggressive, and that can be hard if you're not used to that. But seeing how upset she was on something that I would have been like, because it wouldn't have been such a big deal to me because I've dealt with so many other things, but it made me realize, like, you know what? Students should feel safe at school, but staff
Yeah.
should also feel safe at school. And it's hard because I have such a different lived experience having worked with kids with such severe challenging behavior. What may seem like a big deal to somebody else may not to me. But I think it all goes back to the training, right? And the oversight of like, this is what the behavior plan is, this is what we need to do. But have you seen that too? Probably just like a lack of training, like even on a plan, if there's a plan in place.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, a couple things on that. When you look at the injuries or deaths that have occurred due to restraint, an overwhelming majority of those occurred from like really like sort of like nonviolent or like not at all dangerous, like precipitating events from the kids, like blowing bubbles of milk or like refusing to like relinquish like a ball or put shoes on or something. So it's really people. No one deserves to die when they go to school. Like, let me be clear, but especially for reasons like that. But I also think that there's if it were up to me, we wouldn't restrain or seclude kids. But I also I need to be realistic that like and have seen these cases that you're describing or similar ones where like there are very dangerous situations. So like I understand the sort of like very focused, specialized utility. But it requires a level of training and expertise and oversight that if you're going to physically restrain or seclude somebody, you have to be serious about all these other things that occur too, is that people are trained in the appropriate de-escalation measures and that there's monitoring, medical monitoring, debriefing, oversight of it. You can't just like set it loose and let it go and just not pay attention to what or how it's happening. And those are the things that when I do my like records reviews or work with like advocacy groups and I'm digging through the paperwork, which is
It's a lot of paperwork, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you don't like, a message out there. You should always fill out every document as if it's going to end up in court one day. Because
I do that. One time my data at this super contentious district I worked in for 10 years, super affluent. Like I had worked in non-public programs and always had lawyers looking at my stuff. So my stuff is on point. And I remember one time our data got subpoenaed in the public school and I was like, yeah, take it. Take it and do a tutorial on how you take data because nobody is graphing their data, but we were because you got to have the visual analysis, right? Yeah. So
That's right.
I still have all that. I keep my weekly schedules. I work 2 days a week in a school as a speech therapist now. And I always come from that place of like, I just grew up in really litigious situations. So I just always keep really good records because you need to, right?
Yeah, you can't risk it, and you
Right.
don't want someone who's hired, yourself or me or someone
Right.
else going through it. And it's just, to me, it's always just incredible how for like years, like your restraint seclusion will go on, and the records just indicate pervasive problems, and then you could actually see the fidelity lapses in the
Hmm.
notes themselves, and no one's paying any attention. And so what happens is that they're failing the obligation to provide free and appropriate public
Yeah.
education a lot of the time.
Right.
They're injuring the child, and then they're burning out the staff. And I know plenty of
Yeah.
people who've had concussions,
Yeah.
neck, shoulder injuries, and staff, teachers, they don't deserve to go to work and get hurt either.
Right.
Nobody does. Nobody,
Nobody does, right?
right? So
It's hard.
it's failed. It's failed on many levels, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. So I know you took this year sabbatical and it's a short podcast, but what if you wanted to share any highlights from what you learned during that time? What would be just like some key points that you think would be important to share?
Uh, yeah, the accountability that is on school districts is uh, pretty poor, and the Government Accountability Office has said repeatedly at the federal level that the way that things are documented and reported is problematic and needs reform, and hasn't really happened. One of the most striking things to me was that there's no federal mandate nor database to track or monitor injury or death resulting from restraint and seclusion. I know your
Oh,
eyes. I see your eyes.
wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. So only people that get called into like I was down at FOB. I heard Dr. Merrill Winston has been on my show and he's awesome. I heard him talk in person and he does some expert witness stuff.
Yep.
But I mean, those are when, the important people get called in, unfortunately, right, to review and to really help out with that. I didn't realize there wasn't a database.
No.
That's staggering to know.
The
Yeah.
best source of information is actually newspaper articles. So researchers who want to study injury or death resulting from restraint and seclusion need to go and look at the papers. So those are the only
Wow.
things that make the news, make it
Hmm.
to the research. So I can only think about, I only imagine all the things that go unreported. And
Scary.
so it's the numbers are severely deflated, and if we care about kids, it seems to me that this would be something that we could easily look to understand.
Yeah.
But that's
Right.
just me.
Yeah, we need to track. I mean, behavior that gets tracked gets changed, right? Or gets analyzed. I mean, I know that just from having my small business. I'm like, ooh, I need to know how many of this or that. And like, if we don't have a baseline, right? Your KPIs, right? For business. But it's the same idea. Like we need to know where we're at so we know where we're going. Oh, that is wild.
No,
So we're
isn't
looking
it?
through newspapers. Yeah, that is really, I mean, I think it's just important for people to hear that because they don't know. I mean, I have some friends and colleagues that do some expert witness stuff. And I know there's a lot of reading and going through record reviews and things like that. Um, wow, that's good to know. So on a granular level, if a professional sees something that appears unsafe for staff or students, what's your advice for them on how to remedy this situation? It gets complicated, right? Because we know every clinic and every school is going to have their frameworks in place or they're not, right? But we as professionals may not know that. So we get into the situation and we're like, this doesn't seem right. Like, why are we doing this? Like, where is that documented? So what are your real life steps on if somebody's in a situation like that?
Yeah, I mean, if if you feel, first off, I think maybe trust your gut.
Yeah.
And if you think something's off, I would certainly trust that, and in to the extent to which you can is try to educate yourself or understand like what the best practice like of that might be, which might be easier said than done. It's helpful to have maybe, or to know if you know other people, or if you have access to networks of people who work in similar discipline or same discipline but aren't related to that organization, who could provide you with input. That could also be good. There's this is the thing about the internet that's useful, and I'm not saying go and disclose confidential information. Don't do that. Don't go and give specific information and ask for specific advice on the internet. Don't do that. But there are forums in which you could communicate in an ethical and legal way, to just get some more, info about whether or not something like this is normal or not. And there are people there who might be able to provide you with some input. Obviously, if you see anything, if anyone's at risk of harm or being harmed or being abused or whatever, you should call the police or consult a lawyer if you're totally unsure. But I wouldn't be surprised too. Sometimes there's a really good reason for the way that things are being done, and sometimes people might think that it's a good reason, and it actually, in fact, is not. And so I think that there's a place in these extreme cases for there's a place for whistleblowers, and they need to be protected, and I hope that things are occurring for good reasons. But if not, I would trust your gut and go with that, and you don't have to play party in it, I guess at the worst case scenario, you don't hopefully you have options for places that you can go and work. But if you're not feeling comfortable with doing something, if you have options about where you could work, don't engage with that anymore, too. So
right.
I recognize it's a privilege to maybe have options about where to work, but everyone deserves to go to work and be happy too. So
yes, I love that. Yeah, I've been talking about that on LinkedIn too. Aligning your aligning your values with what you want to do during the day. And it's a life changer, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for this information. It was really just great to have you on the show and to talk to you. I've been talking about you for as long as 9 years since this article came out. So thanks for coming on the show. If people want to learn more about you and your work, do you have a website or somewhere that they can go?
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me, and the compliments, and I look forward to staying in touch. But if anybody wants to, you can visit my website, mattbrodhead.com, mattbrodhead.com. There's only one A in my last name. There you can find out info from me. I've listed, the books that I have there. I do receive financial compensation for the sale of the books, and I have a broader conflict of interest statement there, so in case anyone looking for those disclosures. But I want to make you aware of what those conflicts are. But we have other things that I announced there, things that we got going on, and I'd love to hear from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great to connect.
All right, great. Thanks for having me.